and welcome back to NCSY Pulse. We are powered by NCSY Alumni. You can find us on Instagram at NCSY Pulse, on Spotify, and on YouTube at NCSY Pulse. We are very privileged today to have one of our superstar alumni, former NCSY Judah Fellow and West Coast NCSYer, Tessa Veksler. Tessa, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, John. I'm so excited.
It is awesome to have you. You and I obviously go back to your days as one of our student leaders in the Judah Fellowship on campus.
Yes.
And I know that you were a phenomenal leader in West Coast NCSY, I believe, I want to say NorCal, right?
Yep.
All right. So we will jump into your NCSY story in just a minute. But first of all, before we get to NCSY, catch us up a little bit. How are you? I know your world has been crazy. Tell us what you're doing now.
Thank you. And thank you again for having me. I feel like I'm going back to my roots because NCSY is kind of where it all started for me. So I live in New York now, and I work, in public relations. My firm is called Hiltzik Strategies, and it's amazing and great. And also, my second full-time job is continuing, this thing that I've been blessed with, which is having a platform and speaking and really expressing the reality, first of all, for college students, Jewish college students on American college campuses, but also talking about, now this new reality that I have as a Jewish young professional who's now kind of looking from the outside in. And so I've been really privileged to speak nationwide and even outside the United States. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm very, very lucky, and I'm just kind of on for the ride. And then as I enter 2025, I'm going on a campus tour, which is so exciting,
Wow.
and continuing this crazy life of mine.
Wow, really unbelievable to see your growth and to see you sort of evolve and take on all of these new challenges and adventures. You mentioned that this is sort of going back to your roots in NCSY. Why don't you go back to the beginning? Tell us where your NCSY journey began.
Yeah, for sure. When I was in high school, I would say my sophomore year, and there's actually a video on my Instagram about this where I wrote a letter to my sophomore year English teacher. And in that letter, I basically said that, I have this part of my identity that I don't really share super openly. It's that I'm Jewish. And, isn't that's, crazy to think of now, considering who I am
Sure.
and what I do. But that was just kind of a time around, 16 where I wasn't quite sure where Judaism sat in my life. And I was introduced to NCSY through a family friend who actually called my mom and was telling her about this trip to Israel called TJJ. And at this point, pretty funny, but my parents didn't know what NCSY was. And I come from a very secular former Soviet Union family. And so basically they essentially forced me to go on TJJ because I was I don't have any friends. I don't know anyone. I don't know if I want to go to Israel for a month right now. I want to go on Birthright. And so I ended up going, and that kind of launched everything for me because the month that I spent was extremely inspiring, and it showed me, I finally found where I fit in Jewish life. I always tell this, but I was raised kind of in a Chabad environment because that was the only kind of Jewish center in the East Bay where I was. And so I went to Hebrew school at Chabad, and Chabad was the basis for all the Jewish holidays, etc. And I just kind of found myself more in this modern Orthodox circle. And so that really launched my interest and my passion of getting involved in NCSY. When I came back from TJJ, I started the first Jewish student union in my high school's history.
Really?
Yeah. And then, I went on all the NCSY programs. I did go on Yorkei Kala, and then, NCSY eventually is what led me to take my gap year. So it's my origin story, but also, where NCSY led me to get me to where I am today.
Tell me real quick, who was on your bus? Who was the bus director when you were on TJJ?
It was Rabbi Duvi Jacoby.
Yeah, sure. I know David
Yes.
Jacoby. That's great.
From Oregon, I believe. And it was a great mix. Actually, my bus was the only one that combined with a British tour to Israel
Really?
as well. Yeah, so we were mixed for more than half of the trip with a group of British high school students And actually, some of them I still keep in touch with. So that made our trip special, because we were interacting with Jews that were across the world from where we were.
That's really interesting. Okay,
Yeah.
I didn't even know that there was a partnership between TJJ and another program from England, or if they were just straight in NCSY. But either way, that's really cool. You mentioned, you went on a gap year in Yarchikala, and that I think kind of led into you and I connecting with the NCSY Judah Fellowship when you were at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Now, obviously, the past year and a half has been challenging is not the right word, does not do justice to the situation that you've been in, to the situation that many of our alumni and students have been in on campus. But tell us a little bit about what it was like pre-October 7th, what Jewish life was like, what your leadership role was like, and then let's transition into post-October 7th. I'd like to see sort of the dichotomy of how things shifted.
For sure. UCSB is known for having the highest percentage of Jewish students out of all the UCs. And so our Jewish life was incredibly strong. We had a significant percentage of our Jewish community that was Israeli. And so there was also, this cultural element from them brought into our community, but generally very strong. Our Hillel and our Chabad was very collaborative, and so it kind of felt like one big community. Not exactly sure how it is at other universities where there might be kind of cliques and whatnot, but it felt very, very collaborative. We were all one big family. I became president in May of 2023, student body president. At the time, I was already president of Students Supporting Israel on my campus. And so I was more involved on, the Jewish campus life of things, but I was also, when I was elected student body president, I was serving my term as a senator in student government. So I knew kind of the both worlds. And if I had to describe what, not necessarily Jewish life, but life for Jews on campus was like, I would say when it came to the political issues and anti-Semitism, I would say it was very divisive. But there was still some tolerance in that I remember sitting for hours with students at SJP and having very long conversations, not always ending in the result that I wanted, but there was still room for conversation. I remember the SJP president this past year when I was president, she and I had an incredible conversation. She came to an SSI event at the time. I found out that she was studying, she wanted to go to medical school. We found a lot of comparisons between our families. And so, post October 7th, the environment was just intolerant. That is the word to describe it, where not only was it intolerant toward Jews, but it was intolerant to any sort of conversation with Jews, about Israel, about anything that had to do with the Jewish community. It kind of felt like there was a separation between Jewish students and, the rest of the student body, where it was almost like, we don't want to have anything to do with this, these people on our campus because it comes along with controversy. And so for me as student body president, it was really difficult because not only was I Jewish, but I was in a non-Jewish setting, and I was the head of the biggest organization on our campus, and it was a huge responsibility. I was the CEO of a 501c3 nonprofit. I had immense responsibility with budget and also recognizing that my role inherently was not political,
Right.
and yet I had very strong opinions about Israel because that's my home. So yeah, it was definitely very challenging. Definitely, you could see the change of just people even willing to have a conversation to not being willing to speak to you at all if you were Jewish or if you were a Zionist.
Wow, that's really disappointing. It must have been really intense for you to be dealing with.
Yeah.
I know that you eventually stepped into, from being a senator, you stepped into the role of president while you were there. During all of this upheaval, what was it like serving as president, really in a situation where you need to be taking in mind the needs of the entire university, but also your own values, your own objectives, your own relationships, and balancing it in a situation where, in your own words, it was intolerant, and yet you had to be the focal point of leadership for the student body?
Challenging is like the most simple way to put it, but
Right.
It felt in many ways impossible because I had to basically strike a balance of October 7th was a tragedy that affected the entire Jewish world, myself included. And so I was in a period of mourning. That's part one. Part two was the feeling of the Jewish community in my own home base, in my university, is really struggling right now. And I need to make sure that I'm representing them, because that's part of the reason why they voted me into this position in the first place, is because they wanted to have someone that represented themselves, that they could see themselves in this position. And then the third thing that I had to balance was basically the way that I described being student body president is that it's not a political role. At universities, when you're the student body president, it's like you're involved in student government politics, but essentially the role is very apolitical. And so I would say that the role is more like you're kind of a vessel of student opinion. You're the bridge between students and administration. And so no matter how much I may personally disagree or find certain opinions outrageous or whatever, I needed to relay those thoughts to administration, and then obviously I would give my recommendations and I would have my own thoughts on the general student body's opinions. But when it came to this personal thing, I had a really hard time striking that chord, because I felt like either way I was betraying either my responsibility to the entire student body or betraying myself, my own identity, and my own personal community. And so a lot of the time it required me swallowing my own discomfort, my own pain, my own tragedy. And I had to be extremely level-headed. And honestly, in some ways, I do think that the presidency really shaped my overall response to this. I didn't have the luxury of saying whatever I wanted to say, or just being super combative, because I had to be a level-headed leader and I had to engage with every single opinion. And so it's definitely affected even the way that I am now, where I'm so level-headed in these situations, even where I may be extremely frustrated with what's coming out of someone's mouth when it comes to, the Jewish community in Israel. So it definitely shifted mid-year when I finally posted on social media around February. But when I felt like I could express, I could create a division between my personal platform, which was my outlet, where I could say this is what I'm thinking, this is how I'm feeling, and then my role. But that ultimately was the problem, second semester, where my fellow students claim that I couldn't separate the two, which is, by the way, an expectation that wouldn't be placed on any other person. Sure. You would never tell a person from any community, any minority, sorry, you can't be a woman right now because you're actually the student body president and you need to separate your identity and your gender from your role. Sorry, you can't be Christian, Muslim. No other person would be expected to separate those things because you come as one whole package. And also, first and foremost, I was a student, but before I was a leader, and that was the whole thing with administration, is they kind of justified what I was going through by saying that I was in a political position and therefore warranted political criticism. And in their eyes, that political criticism included anti-Semitism.
It's been the story as old as time that Jews are always accused of the dual loyalty.
Yes.
That are they loyal to the institution, to the government, to the locale, or are they loyal to their Judaism, to Israel, etc.? And what you're experiencing, unfortunately, is not a new terror. It's not a new evil. It's something that's been around for thousands of years, and once again seems to be popping up. I don't know how you do it. I don't know how you find the strength to stand up to all these people, how you found the strength to go on. It's honestly, just from where I was watching, I was in awe of seeing you, one of our own, standing up and defending all of us with such a huge platform. But what would you tell students? You graduated, you did your job admirably, and now there's freshmen and soon to be 12th graders who are moving into the same situation and it could be now things have calmed down a little bit for the moment, but you and I both know that it could change tomorrow. It could change next week. There's no real way to know what things are going to be like next semester, next year, or next week on campus. What would you tell an incoming freshman that they need to prepare for, and how should they prepare?
The first thing that I want to say is something that actually a rabbi said to me recently, is that post-October 7th, life has turned ordinary people into extraordinary people. And so that's what I think about our generation today, is like not necessarily like, I don't think that I'm extraordinary in the way that I've handled this. I think that I am a Jewish person in this generation that's been handed the challenge for the Jewish people, like for this generation, in the same way that in the previous generation there was a different challenge of anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism has shown up in different ways. This is our version, today's version, and I'm no different than the Jews that have come before me, and that I have a responsibility to step up. And so is it extraordinary in many ways? Yes, but at the same time, it's like this is the challenge, the extraordinary challenge that we've been given, and so we've had to find unique solutions. The hardest thing is especially when I speak to high school students, is that I know that they're heading into an impossible situation. Right. I know that parents are extremely concerned because the majority of what you see coming out in the news, online, etc., about Jewish life on college campuses is negative. And so that's the first thing to remember, is let's set realistic expectations, because we know that the encampments are one piece of what was happening, and it made Jewish life intolerable on campus. However, you're not going to see the 200-person Shabbats every week. You're not going to see, Jews congregating and doing events and marches, etc., at every single college campus. That's just not the most publicly available information. And so I think it's important to remember that these situations are manageable and we have to manage them. And I think that if you see anti-Semitism on a college campus, that means that we're like not sending enough Jews there. Like for every anti-Semite, we need 10 Jews. And so my solution for a school like Columbia is not to say like, don't send your kids there. It's send all your kids there, because if they're not there, who's going to be the voice of dissonance? Nobody. And so that leads into the next point that I would say for high school students, is that you have to be the voice of dissonance, which means that even the simplest thing, like if you're in a classroom and a professor is saying something about Jews, about Israel, about our history that you know is not true, the biggest thing you can do is to raise your hand. Because even if you raise your hand, even if you don't start arguing with your professor or give a counterpoint and you just ask a question, the people around you, if they're paying attention, they will say, like, they will think, like, if there's someone that's questioning this, then it might not be the full picture. And that's how I felt in any class. Like, if one of my classmates was asking a question, then I'm like, oh, so they're also not sure about this, like confirming that, this might not be the full truth, or this might not be the completely correct answer. And so that's the first thing. Be brave enough to at least raise your hand in your classroom, just because you never know who's watching. And in terms of, I think that involvement in Jewish life on campus should be a given for every single Jew. Like, you should be involved, not even like for the campus's sake, for your own sake, because you're going to need a community, especially when things are difficult. Like it was for me. I really needed my Jewish community to lean on. But I also think that there is importance in being involved in the broader campus community, the non-Jewish community on campus, because that is how we have influence and that is how people humanize us. For me personally, I was really proud, even before this happened. I don't know if you remember this, but when I became student body president at UCSB, I was the first Shabbos observant student body president in UCSB's history. Can you imagine? I have an automatic email response every Shabbos. So like if anyone emails me between Friday night and Saturday night, they get an automatic response saying Shabbat Shalom, like see you Sunday, Monday, whatever. Can you imagine how many people like Googled what Shabbat Shalom meant?
I love it. Incredible.
And so it's something like that where sometimes it's like the most simple basic thing that just introduces people to a concept that they may have never known before. Maybe it's their first time working with a Jewish person in general, and maybe you're showing up as your full self, and people appreciate you not just because you're Jewish, but because of the other qualities that you bring to the table. And so I felt like the people that were working for me, they respected me as a leader, as a boss, as their colleague, and therefore when it came the time to also see how much I was affected as a Jew, they were there for me, and they defended me, and they, sympathized. And so that would be my advice. Don't isolate yourself, get involved, and be brave enough to raise your hand.
That's really outstanding. And you really have developed into such a beacon for the Jewish people on campus and beyond campus. And you did so much that I would not have even thought to do, and so many things you did right. Was there ever a moment, looking back on all this, where maybe you didn't do it so perfectly? You could look back, we all make mistakes. And whether it's the fellows or my students or my colleagues, I am a fan of sharing my mistakes. And there are many of them to share. But is there a time that you tried for something amid all of this and, let's say, missed the mark of what you were going for, but maybe learned something else along the way?
Sure. I actually prefer people to see me as an imperfect being, because I think first of all, I don't believe in idolizing anyone. And I always tell students this, that your heroes can be your heroes, but you also have to recognize that they're human beings.
Right.
And anything that you see as qualities in your heroes can be your own, and you can adapt them. And so in terms of mistakes that I've made, I think I've made a lot. I think something that I'm still working on is having patience. And not always, doing the first gut reaction thing. Sometimes it serves me well, like in February when I posted on social media and that picture went viral where I'm standing in front of, the poster that says Zionists not allowed. That was a very gut reaction moment for me, where I texted my friend. I'm like, I think I'm going to just do something crazy. I haven't said anything publicly about this, and I'm just going to, out of nowhere, with no thought considered, and look where it led me. But then there are other times also where I've maybe responded too quickly or, made a comment that I regretted. And it just came from not really thinking things through or demonstrating some self-restraint. So I think, and then also the reverse has happened, where some people don't deserve your patience. Some people in an environment especially where people were harassing me every single day, they didn't deserve my restraint that I showed them for months on end, where I was literally asking for conflict mediation with the anti-Semites online. And it's not necessarily that I regret it, but it's that sometimes I wish I did take a firmer stance earlier on and nipped it before it got as bad as it did, although I think it still would have. And so I think it's kind of, the advice that I would give is finding the balance between knowing when to act and acting with conviction, and also knowing when it's okay not to say something. You don't have to comment on every single issue. You don't have to comment on every instance, that of anti-Semitism necessarily. I think it's always important to do something, but sometimes the most obvious response is not the right one. Sometimes it's not just saying or not automatically responding. Sometimes it's taking a more measured approach. Sometimes it's organizing something even bigger. And so that's kind of what I've learned with time. And I still make that mistake frequently, but it's par for the course. So
it is, and we all do. And that's part of being a leader, and part of being human is you make mistakes, and sometimes they're big mistakes, but we learn and we move on and we grow. That's the best way to grow. You're clearly a tremendous up-and-coming leader, and from our perspective at NCSY, seeing you ascend it's really amazing, and we're all very proud to see what you're doing for the Jewish people, for Israel. I'd like to think that there, is a small part of this that in your NCSY history, we can find some of the origins, we can find some of the impacts that maybe pointed Tessa Veksler into this upward trajectory. Was there a time or a memory in your NCSY journey that you could point at and say, this had a profound impact on me and maybe started to point me in this direction?
For sure. It was actually the first day on TJJ. We were all asked to write down a goal that we had for the trip, if I remember correctly. And we were sitting around a fire, and we were all like writing, and everyone else was writing really quickly, and I was like, okay, I don't know what to write because I have no goals. I just want to go to the Dead Sea. So, my thoughts were like, I don't know what to write. And I was like, let me write down something simple. But it ended up changing the entire trajectory of my trip, was that I wrote down that I wasn't allowed to say no to anything, which meant like, even, experience, I'm really scared of heights, and I climbed like, a canyon vertically. Like, I would never do that today.
Wow.
It was like keeping Shabbat and keeping kosher, and just like sticking to the experience and living it to the fullest and really trusting the process. And I think that really outlined where I am now, because I remember coming back from TJJ and feeling really lost because there wasn't a Jewish student union, and that's why I started one. But, I was like, how do I keep this? Yeah, it was easy to keep Shabbat when I had a program that was feeding me and giving me programming, and everyone else was in the same boat as I was. But now I'm back in this environment. My parents weren't necessarily super supportive of it, and I was just like, okay, what do I do with this? And I think that is literally why it's so important to me now. Like, why Shabbat is such a value for me, because it was kind of a challenge to get there. And so it definitely instilled something in me today that challenges are perfectly crafted to you by Hashem, because you're the only person that's meant to deal with them. And so when this happened to me throughout this past year, I was like, this is just my handcrafted challenge. Like, I'm the Jewish student body president right now for a reason. I'm supposed to be in this position. Maybe I secretly hoped for like something that would activate me, and this was my chance. Hashem maybe could have made it a little easier, but this is what was given to me, and this is how, I had a choice to make. Either step down from your role and be fine, or step up to the challenge. And I chose to step up to it, and it was because I had this like core thing of like trusting the process and really realizing that even the most challenging experiences are meant to shape you and not break you.
Love it. Amazing. It sounds like you got a lot of really good insight and advice, and perhaps even some good mentorship along the way in your journey. Is there someone from NCSY that you could point to and you would say, that person was a mentor, that person was an impact on my life? Obviously, it seems like you took advantage of the whole program, whether it was TJJ or your hometown programs, but was there somebody from NCSY that stuck out in your mind that you would identify as a key figure in this growth process?
For sure. And I think I could list several. Like, I remember in my first days that I was starting, Dr. Lukens was a huge figure in NCSY in general, but especially for me. And I actually met him on TJJ, and he was so inspiring for me. And then I had an NCSY advisor named Mara who would learn with me every single week, and that really shaped me in the beginning because I felt super behind on knowledge. But I would say through and through, start and now, is Rabbi Akiva Naiman. He is remarkable in so many ways, and in everything that he does and continues to do for NCSY. But for me personally, he's someone who I definitely turn to, and he was honestly like part of the reason why I got to go on my gap year, because he was like the mediator with my parents, and he helped me even in the past few weeks, like if I ask him questions about this new professional career that I have in the Jewish space, he's really helpful in advising me there. So both as a rabbi, as a mentor, as a friend, I really admire him. Hopefully he doesn't hate me for saying anything.
No, I know Akiva very well, and he's a friend, and he's not just a mentor to you, he's a mentor to so many others. And like I said, a friend of mine, a friend of so many in NCSY, and you were lucky to have him, if we're being honest. And I think he was lucky to meet you, and you guys obviously were able to really strike up an amazing relationship that you still have to this day. And really credit to you and credit to Akiva for being able to identify that. And I think that's one of the really incredible things of NCSY. One of the amazing features, I guess, of the organization is that we have amazing people like Akiva all over who are able to step up and impact young Jewish leaders and really stick with them through the process. Like you said, stick to the process, stick with the people, And that's really what powers everything. So as we wrap up here, Tessa, and again, thank you so much for joining us today and taking from your free time. I know you're so busy with everything that you're doing, but what is next for Tessa Veksler? What do you got coming up? Give us a little sneak peek.
Well, that's always a hard question. I always say, like, when some of your wildest dreams come true before you were even ready to like accept them, it's difficult to come up with newer and bigger dreams. And so for me right now, at least for the past year, I'm really looking forward to the tour and really speaking to college students and helping them on an individual level, on a campus-specific level. So I plan to continue speaking as much as I possibly can and traveling. What's also really exciting is this film that was executive produced by Deborah Messing, directed by Wendy Sachs, October Hate, that I have been honored to be a significant character in, is going to be BH released hopefully this upcoming year to the public. And so I'm really excited about that as well. There's been a lot of screenings happening, but it's genuinely one of like the things that I'm most proud of being a part of in the past year. So I'm just excited for people to see it, both Jewish and not Jewish. And, it's hard to tell where I'll be in the future, whether it will be in politics. I've been working on a book, but it's difficult to write a book when you're also working a 9-to-5 and you're traveling as much as I am. But I do have a lot of goals and am looking for continuous involvement and also for strengthening various coalitions in the Jewish world. I would love to be someone who like is pioneering the relationships between the Jewish community and other groups. That's one of my goals in the next couple of years. So you haven't seen the last of me. I will continue being on social media and speaking and traveling, and as long as people want to listen, I will keep talking, and probably even then.
We love to hear it. We're really proud of you here. And thank you so much again for spending some time with us today. Everybody, you can follow Tessa's adventures on Instagram at Tessa Veksler. This is NCSY Pulse. Again, you can find us on Instagram at NCSY Pulse, on YouTube at NCSY Pulse, and wherever you find your podcasts. Everybody have a happy new year. And Tessa, thank you very much. We'll talk to you soon.
Thank you so much.